folks, it's been a week or so, probably about 2 weeks, I think, almost 2 weeks since the horrific death of right-wing provocateur Charlie Kirk. And in the last week or so, there's been an immediate chilling effect coming from the right wing when it comes to cancel culture. Now, Charlie Kirk himself over and over said that there's no such thing as hate speech. That was literally one of his most famous quotes. There's no such thing as hate speech in America. It's all protected by the First Amendment. Everything, nobody should be losing their jobs. Nobody should be arrested or harassed because of their own personal speech. That was his stance. You can find it over and over again. No such thing as hate speech. Well, in light of his death, apparently his fans do not agree. There have been an excess of firings, suspensions, and job losses just for having an opinion about a man now that it seems like our government is actually trying to compel us to mourn. Private sector workers, public figures have been fired or disciplined merely for expressing their opinion, something that Charlie Kirk said that they had every right to do. For example, MSNBC fired Matthew Dowd, one of their analysts, for saying that Charlie Kirk's rhetoric contributed to a toxic climate. And they fired him. And most famously, very, very recently in the last few days, ABC has suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live indefinitely after host Jimmy Kimmel claimed on the air that the assassin of conservative activists was affiliated with the MAGA movement, contradicting authorities' reports that suspect Tyler Robinson held progressive views, including on trans activism and opposition to MAGA. And for that, ABC literally suspended this man, and it is indefinitely, and they're trying to force him to not only apologize to Charlie Kirk's family, they also want him to donate financially to Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA organization that his wife is now taking over. I just saw his wife was named the CEO. I wonder if they did a very vigorous search for the new CEO, or if his wife was merely given the job as a DEI hire. I don't know. Somebody needs to look into that. The White House has also ordered flags that have staff in his honor. And FCC Chairman Brendan Carr has threatened retaliatory action against ABC and parent company Disney for the misinformation. So now we're at a point where comedians, not news people, comedians. Now, remind you, Ronald Reagan got rid of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, specifically because the right wing did not think it was the media's job to fact check and demand that there is any sort of responsibility to tell truth in journalism. So we got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, which was something that existed in the media for decades after Franklin Roosevelt. The Republicans were against this, mind you. Or should I say the Republicans were for getting rid of the Fairness Doctrine. We've also seen school employees and other public sector workers face all kinds of penalties We've seen doctors, nurses, teachers, social media users who made comments ranging from mocking to critical about the killing be publicly identified, have their employment questioned, or face doxing or threats. Websites and platforms have literally emerged to collect tips about educators and other public sector employees who made controversial or offensive remarks about the assassination. Now, see, here's where I have an issue. Again, Charlie Kirk said there's no such thing as hate speech. The right wing has spent the last 15 years mocking the deaths of all kinds of black people, mocking Trayvon Martin's death. There was actually a social media trend called Trayvoning in 2012 when Trayvon Martin was murdered, where a lot of these right-wing people would pretend to would pose with their face on the ground while wearing a hoodie, which was the position that Trayvon Martin was found dead in. Now, that was a child who was stalked by a grown man. He was a child minding his own business, walking from the store with his Skittles and his iced tea. George Zimmerman tracked this child who was minding his own damn business, called the police on Trayvon Martin, even though he wasn't doing anything. The operator on the other end of the phone said if the kid's not doing anything, you can't just harass him for looking suspicious. So just get in your truck and go home. That is what we have the 911 call saying. George Zimmerman continued to follow Trayvon Martin, eventually started a fight with Trayvon Martin, and eventually killed Trayvon Martin. And the right wing in this country made plenty of jokes about Trayvoning and blamed Trayvon Martin for wearing a hoodie. These people mocked the deaths of Eric Garner. I can't breathe. They mocked Eric Garner's death. They mocked Breonna Taylor's death. Particularly Charlie Kirk shared a lot of jokes and memes about Breonna Taylor, and especially about George Floyd. The right wing made so much fun of the death of this man that we literally had to watch have the life taken out of him, strangled out of him, while Derek Chauvin's knee was on his neck for 10 minutes. They say he was having a drug overdose. I say, even if I was using your logic that he was having a drug overdose, a public servant like Derek Chauvin should know what a drug overdose looks like and should have gotten him some sort of care. Why didn't he get him an ambulance if he was having a drug overdose? In what world would you put your knee on somebody's neck who's having a drug overdose? If you're an experienced first responder, why would you do that? Why would you put your knee on anybody's neck, especially somebody who's not fighting? George Floyd was just on the ground crying and praying and talking to his mother. But somehow, Charlie Kirk and all Laura Loomer and all the right-wing pundits thought it was absolutely hilarious that we had to watch this black man be killed in front of us in live time, including Candace Owens, who is a coon, just call her what she is. They thought it was absolutely hilarious. So we've watched these people mock Black Death for years and years and years. And the minute somebody who's trafficked and all that takes a shot to the neck, more than likely sent from that blue and white country, in my opinion, I'm still not necessarily on board with the official narrative because there's some things that, need to be sorted out. All of a sudden, you can't mock anybody's death. You can't even criticize his movement. You can't criticize him. Or you live in direct threat of losing your job, being arrested, if you're in school, being kicked out of school, losing your scholarship. So there's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk about hypocrisy. Oh my God, the Republicans are hypocrites, man. They said there was no such thing as hate speech. They said there's no such thing as speech that was so offensive that it couldn't be said, and that people shouldn't lose their jobs or be fired or be arrested for speech. They're hypocrites. But I have to remind people, the Republicans are not hypocrites. The right wing in this country are not hypocrites for saying that there's no such thing as hate speech and then being upset when people make fun of Charlie Kirk's death. No, the hypocrisy, their hypocrisy came much earlier. Their hypocrisy came when they started claiming that there was no such thing as free speech. Because if you go back through the history of the right in this country post-World War II, nobody has ever engaged in more cancel culture than the right wing in this country. They were being hypocritical when they were claiming they were against cancel culture. That's when they were being hypocritical, because nothing about their history, nothing about their history in this country says that they've ever been against cancel culture. Let's go back to the 1950s. During the 1950s, there was a movement called McCarthyism. When thousands upon thousands of Americans, even some of the most famous people in America, had their lives and careers ruined by right-wingers who were fear-mongering about communism and about socialism. It led to such a chilling effect that to this day, I always talk about this. This is the only country in the free world where people can't have overt discussions about socialism or communism without people breaking out in hives. Bernie Sanders isn't even a real socialist. He's just a New Deal, Great Society era Democrat. That's it. That's all he is. He's a New Deal, Great Society era Democrat who believes in a social safety net. He's not an anti-imperialist, never has been. But the media acts like, oh, crazy Bernie. Oh my God. Bernie Sanders would literally fit into virtually any first world country's parliament. He'd fit into Canada's parliament. He'd fit into England, France, Germany, Switzerland. Plenty of countries in Latin America. Australia, plenty of countries. Him saying that we need universal health care, people in every other first world country go, yeah, and the rich need to pay their fair share of taxes. Yeah, and he'd get laughed out of parliament for acting like these are such huge deals, because they already agree with it in virtually every first world country. They already do it in most first world countries. But America is such a propagandized nation, particularly by right-wing corporate propaganda, that Bernie Sanders is portrayed as the most crazy, weird, wacky, out there politician in the history of the world. And that is all an effect of McCarthyism. I actually talked about a documentary. I actually did a segment on the documentary Scandalize My Name a few years ago with Harry Belafonte and Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee and all these other people talking about how McCarthyism ruined their careers for a long time. How so many, particularly black entertainers and black people in public life had their lives ruined by McCarthyism. And I actually, let me see if I can find this video.
Their power rested entirely on the fact that they represented districts where blacks could not vote, in which blacks were in a majority. So if the blacks won the vote, their power would end immediately.
And they were the ones who were most ardent in their pursuit of the Red Devils, and they were the ones who were most ardent in keeping the blacks down.
We know that to J. Edgar Hoover, an interest in improving the status of the Negro was a communist symptom, just as the idea of being interested in better relations with the Soviet Union was a communist symptom.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist.
Before McCarthy came along, the industry, both Hollywood and broadcasting, had already established what McCarthy was accused of doing, sort of terrorizing the people who worked in it.
I can remember very well when I first saw Red Channels, because it was my 42nd birthday. I happened to wander into a bookstore, and there was this thing, Red Channels, with a microphone and a red hand over it. And I picked it up to look at it. It was $1. And I suddenly saw what it purported to be, a documentation of a conspiracy to take over the broadcast media for the Soviet cause. That's what it said it was. And this was a list of 151 people that showed how who these conspirators were.
The point of this book was everything you wanted to know about every writer or performer. And most of these people were well-known performers who had appeared at functions during the war, had been supported by the War departments, and Mrs. Roosevelt, who herself was suspect.
What they were being condemned for was all the things that had been liberal impulses over the last 20 years. More rights for the Negro, civil liberties, better relations with the Soviet Union, peace. Red Channels was the beginning of it. But this was such a nice business that other agencies grew up and did the same sort of thing. There was an organization called AWARE, which very aggressively began to list other people who were not in Red Channels.
There was a publication called Counterattack. There was one called AWARE. And then there was the Attorney General of the United States of America, who had his own list. The State Department had a list. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI had a list. The Ku Klux Klan had a list. All the white citizens groups had a list. Some unions had a list.
You had these clearance bodies set up by some group that decided, since they had the expertise, they could read newspapers and clip the Daily Worker and find out who appeared at a certain kind of a function as a singer, as a writer, as a performer. Before you knew it, some of the best people in the business were being blacklisted.
So you hear right there, that was what life was like in the 1950s. They blacklisted Hazel Scott, Lena Horne, a bunch of people. They said communists want better relationship between whites and blacks. Communists want better relationships with the Soviet Union. And so anybody who's espousing anything that could be seen as what would be called today woke, anything that be called woke is communism. And you can easily go right now online and go to Google Images or something. There was a very famous sign that said race mixing is communism. Race mixing is communism. That's why they called Martin Luther King a communist. They called Rosa Parks a communist. This is what the right wing was doing in the 1950s. This is the origins of cancel culture. In the 1960s, the FBI deployed COINTELPRO against Martin Luther King. Again, they said he was a communist. They said he was a socialist. Though he did, in his own words, say that his ideology was closest to democratic socialism. That is why people like Charlie Kirk say he was a bad guy and that the Civil Rights Act was a bad thing. You see what I'm saying? They're going back to their roots. This is who they've always been. Do not let them gaslight you into thinking that cancel culture was some liberal thing. Lord knows I have my own issues with liberals. If you listen to the show, you know how I feel about liberals. But cancel culture is 100% conservative, born and bred. That is why they spent the 1960s going after Martin Luther King, after Malcolm X, after the Black Panthers, even John Lennon. Even John Lennon of the Beatles. J. Edgar Hoover went after John Lennon. There's a documentary called The United States versus John Lennon that was made about 10 or 15 years ago. Our government literally went to the war with the lead singer of the Beatles because he was anti-war. And again, that was seen as being communistic and socialistic. The FBI deployed COINTELPRO against student-led movements, left-wing movements. The CIA brought in people like Gloria Steinem to infiltrate left-wing movements, which is why we have this sort of form of destructive feminism that we have in this country now. That's determined to put women against men and men against women, etc. These people have always been cancelers. Our government, the FBI, the CIA, they always deployed these movements to destroy left-wing movements. Yeah, they say, well, you know, they deployed COINTELPRO against the KKK too. Yeah, but the KKK still exists. The Black Panthers don't. Virtually none of the civil rights organizations that they deployed COINTELPRO against, they don't exist. MLK certainly don't exist no more. Malcolm X certainly don't exist no more. You go further into the 80s and 90s, when the religious right, when Ronald Reagan and the religious right came into power, and they started going after musicians heavily. Madonna, Ozzy Osbourne, and Judas Priest had to go on trial for their lives because of prosecution. People wanted to prosecute them for what they say in their lyrics. This is why I never go along with the people who want to persecute rappers because they don't like their music. Don't listen to it if you don't like it. But I know what this leads to. Blaming artists for societal ills leads to where we were in the 80s and 90s, where the 2 Live Crew were being arrested on stage for rapping dirty rap songs, where Larry Flynt had to go on trial to not go to jail just for putting out naked pictures. You don't like it, don't read it. Don't listen to it. You don't like the movie? Don't watch it. That's what freedom of speech is about. They spent the entirety of the 80s canceling Madonna, Ozzy Osbourne, the 2 Live Crew, Ice-T, who forgets the cop killer era. When they wanted to put Ice-T in jail and blame him for killing cops. Murphy Brown. Dan Quayle wanted to cancel Murphy Brown because she was a single mother. And Dan Quayle said that she was terrible, a terrible role model. They wanted to cancel the video game Doom and tried to outlaw that, and Mortal Kombat. And they said that the Columbine killers were inspired by that. And Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson was blamed for Columbine by these people. Every facet of our society, the right wing were out there canceling people. Jerry Falwell was canceling the Teletubbies because he said they were gay. The Teletubbies. This is how we spent much of the 80s and 90s. In the 2000s, the Dixie Chicks were canceled for saying that they were ashamed that George W. Bush was from Texas. How many of you guys remember that? How many of you guys remember people like Rage Against the Machine being canceled after 9/11 and different political groups for not being sufficiently pro-America in the days after 9/11? Last week, I started the show off by playing the speech of Barbara Lee a few days after 9/11, the representative congresswoman from California. Oh, you best to believe she got canceled. You better believe she had to have personal security for years. They wanted to cancel Desperate Housewives because there was a commercial where it was implied one of them was having sex with a black man, Terrell Owens, the football player. And let's not forget, Gary, Indiana's own, Janet Jackson. That's Miss Jackson. If you're nasty, point that mic, because I ain't got Janet posted here. When her boob accidentally popped out at the Super Bowl, her career was pretty much ruined by that. Not because liberal groups were so offended by it. It was the right-wing Christian, religious, moral majority, Republican groups who demanded that a crackdown on all of our media because they said that it was too lascivious. They said that. So Janet Jackson spent the next 20 years or so, 10 to 15 years especially, in career limbo. For an accident, because it wasn't on purpose. You can tell it wasn't on purpose. It was an accident. And this is why when liberals came out with their own form of cancel culture in the 2010s, really the Obama era, where you started seeing them mount their cancel culture offensives, at people because they were anti-LGBTQRSTUV, XYZ, or because they said something about they hurt some minority groups' feelings, or because they offended women or some other group. I said, man, you guys are acting like the Republicans used to act. I remember when you guys used to say, if you don't like it, don't listen to it. That's what you always told the Republicans, and you were right to say that. And I remember saying, the next time the right's back in power, they're going to use that opportunity to get some get back. And here we are. Here we are. "70 years almost after McCarthyism, the right wing has stopped being hypocritical and just embraced who they are. Fascists who want to control all of our lives. They want to control what we think, what we do, and what we say. And this is who they've always been. Don't let them convince you of anything else." Yeah, they may have let liberals have about a decade or so post-Obama of canceling people. But when it comes to cancel culture, the OGs are the conservatives. All right, folks. Off the soapbox, about to get on another one. We are going to talk about the state of my ancestral homeland, Mississippi. Was a young black man lynched, actually lynched in the state of Mississippi. Wow. In 2025. You won't want to miss it. We'll be right back after these on Straight Outta the Cannon. Stay with us here on WLTH 1370 AM.